All right, so I've got my index.astro page open and I've got my server up and running over this way, and we're in lesson 4, which is all about styling. Now, we haven't really done anything with styling so far, which is why we've got this ugly beast over here. Now, there are a bunch of different ways you can use styling in Astro components, and they're super flexible. So however you like to write styling, you can do it in Astro. Now, that means I can come over here to start with, and I can just add a style tag. Because this is just plain HTML, I can say whatever. I can say like font size, like 4 rem. And if I save that, you see it gets a lot bigger. Now, in addition to that, because this is essentially like JSX style, I can actually write in here like JavaScript or CSS in JavaScript. So I could say something like background color, and then I could just say red like that. And you can see how I actually get the background color red here. And this is just using this JSX or CSS-in-JS style. Now, generally speaking, you shouldn't be writing a ton of inline styles, so I'm going to remove all of this and show you my preferred way, and that is to actually write style tags directly in the component. So if I come down here and just add style tags like this, the cool thing about these is by default, they're automatically scoped. That means I can just type paragraph like this and say like font size, like 4 rem, something like that. You can see it automatically gets huge. It gets to 4 rem. Now, the cool thing about this is if I were to come over here and inspect this, so if I jump in here and inspect this, you'll notice that Astro has added its own little like scoped styling to it. So in other words, it's actually scoping it, so not every paragraph tag is selected. Now, the other cool thing and smart thing that Astro does is it uses this new where syntax, which doesn't add any specificity by default, so you can see it just scopes it directly to this component. Now, for some reason, I want this entire style tag to be something that's more global. I can actually come over here and add an extra little attribute here, this directive called isGlobal. And you can see just like that, now it's global. If I refresh over here, you can see how now that's been stripped away from it. So this style tag will now affect every single thing on my site. I'm actually not going to be writing any global styles like this. I'll show you what we're going to do, which is going to be importing a style sheet later on. Now, one other thing I can do here is add a language like this and do SASS directly in here. That means I can do something like if I have a paragraph tag and maybe I come in here and I nest inside of here and have like a span, and then I say like color is blue, and maybe let's come over here and let's wrap this with a span tag like this, and I save it. It's going to tell me first of all that I need to install a dependency. So let's do that quickly, and then you can write these. I forgot to tell you that. We'll install SASS. Now, if I type npm run dev and get that back up and running, you'll notice over here that now this is blue, and I'm writing SASS directly in this style tag. Now, between this lesson and the next, I'm going to actually strip that SASS package out of here because we're not going to be using SASS in this project, just so you know what's going on. Now, you actually get another cool thing you can do in Astro, and that is you can pass in variables directly in here. And you can use the define keyword like this and type in vars. Now, this is especially helpful if you have like a bunch of dynamic variables that are going to be changing. So for instance, I could have like a foreground color, and maybe let's call it background color like this. So I'm defining these two inside the scope of this style tag. Then I could add in a paragraph tag here like background color, and I could pass it my var of background color. Now you can just use normal CSS variables as well, but the reason you would define it like this is so you can actually change stuff dynamically in your front matter, and that's what I'm about to show you here. So let's get rid of this, and we'll call this foreground color. Now what I can do is come up top here and type foreground color. So I could pass it something like HSL, and maybe we do like, I don't know, 20, which would be like a reddish color, 50%, and like 50%. And I'll copy this down, and I'll call this background color. And here maybe I change this to something like 200. You can see how I'm passing in variables up top from JavaScript down to my style tag and then inserting them here. Now, where that would be helpful is if you're obviously dynamically changing these based on some user feedback or what page you happen to be on or that kind of thing. So we're actually not going to be doing this. We're just going to be using normal CSS variables that I've scoped in another file I'll show you in a second. But just so you know, you can do this if you'd like to. Now, a lot of times styling will obviously be done based on which classes you are passing in. So let's get rid of all this. And what we're going to do is have two paragraphs here, one here and one here. And this one we're going to give a class, and we'll say something like big, all right? And then if I come down here, I could just type big, and then say font size is 4 rem. So I've saved this here. You see one of these is big and the other one is small. Now, there's nothing special here yet, but there is a way to actually dynamically decide which classes are attached based on a certain state. Let me show you what I mean. So if I come up top here, I could have something like is red, or yeah, that works. And then we'll say true to start with. Then what I can do is I can use a different thing other than a class. I can use what Astro calls a class list. This directive, because it's templated, remember, everything templated gets inside brackets like this. So it takes in an array. If I type an array here, I can type in strings. So for instance, I could type big. If I save it, nothing should change. However, I can also use other things. So I can pass in sets, I can pass in objects, I can pass whatever I want. But with a Boolean like this, what I could do is simply type a object here, and I could say red, and then basically just point it to the variable is red. And what this will do is say, if it is red, then I want you to pass it this red class. So let me save this. Let's come down here. We'll say red, and I'll say color is red. You can see there, now it's red. If I come here, we'll say it is now false. Now it should not be red. Now what is it doing? What it's doing is inside of this class list directive, it's evaluating this right here and saying, if this is true, then drop this in as a class. And just to show you what I mean there, if I come over here, you can see that now it just says red. Now both of them are scoped with this style tag, so they both have this Astro. If I come down here, you can see that right here. Where those are true, then do this. However, you'll notice that because this is just being evaluated, this is what's being spit out. So if I change this to false, nothing will be passed in. Now, of course, you can do like a template string if you'd like as well, but I like this syntax. I think it's a little bit cleaner. All right, well, that's about everything you might want to know when it comes to CSS in Astro. We're now going to mostly forget about CSS and focus on Astro itself, but I wanted to give you an idea of how you can style things locally inside of components. Now, generally speaking, you might also have some global style sheets that would affect everything, and that's what we're going to actually set up now. So let me get rid of all this. Let's get rid of all the style tag as well, and I'll get rid of this as well. Now, what I'm going to do is open up the sidebar, and I'm going to create another folder inside SRC. Now, again, it has to be inside SRC because that's where Astro does all of its work. We're simply going to call this styles. You can call it whatever you want, but that's what I'm going to call it. And then inside here, I'm going to create a new file. We'll call this global.css. Now, the content of all of this basically is going to fill out the whole site. And you can grab this from the GitHub and the repo. I'm going to put all this in. We've got 630 lines of code. Note here that this is not necessarily the best CSS. I wrote it to where if you follow this tutorial exactly, it will make your site look like how the tutorial sites look. And it basically will minimize how many classes we have to type and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to make it a little bit easier on you, but just so you know, you probably wouldn't want to just use this in your own site without some significant rewriting. All right, let's go ahead and save this. Now, how do I get this inside of this component to where it'll actually use it on my site? Well, let's think through the components we have. We've got a couple different routes. These are our pages, but there's one thing that's on every page, and that is this main layout. So what I can do is come into the main layout here, and because this is JavaScript up top, I can just import it directly inside here. So let's say something like style import, and all I'm going to do is say import as a relative path here. We're going to go up a level, then we're going to go to styles, then we're going to go to global.css, and I'll hit save, and that should pull in a bunch of stuff, and you can see it does. Now we also need to pull in a font, and so I've got a font we're using called Atkinson Hyperlegible, and you can get it from Google Fonts. I'll have a link to this in the description if I remember correctly, but we'll just grab all of these like this, and then I'll come up top, click this, and then let's copy this, and we need to add this in the head of our document. Now you remember that our main head is right here. I can either control click or command click, I think it is, or I can come over here and just add it directly in here, and that's what I'll do. So I'll come in here and just paste it in like that. If I move back this way, it should have updated that, and I think it did. Cool. Now I've got two other things I want to show you. First of all, Astro uses something called Vite as its bundler, and Vite has PostCSS built in by default. So what we're going to do is actually use a PostCSS plugin to get some extra benefits out of our styling. This will also give our global CSS file some superpowers. If I come over here, you're going to notice that I've got nested things inside here, and I'm not using SASS. I'm actually using this PostCSS import we're going to use in a second. So you do need to do this to get the project working correctly, but I think it's also such a powerful tool to add things like auto prefixers and to minify your code automatically that really most people should be using PostCSS. If you want more of an insight into PostCSS, I've done a full tutorial on it, and I'll try to remember to link it in the description, but you can also just find it on my channel. So what we're going to do is go ahead and install this. So let me open up my terminal here, and I'm going to say npm I postcss and postcss preset env. Now this preset env is what allows us to write modern CSS and not have to worry about a bunch of backwards compatibility. Now that I've got PostCSS installed, all I have to do is come over here and add a new file. We're going to call this postcss.config.cjs, and that common JS is important because that's how Vite works. Now inside here, I'm going to export a module, so module.exports equals, and then this is an object here. We're going to pass it a plugin, and the plugin that we installed was called PostCSS preset env. So we'll require that. So require like this, PostCSS preset env. And then this itself can take in some arguments. What it can do is take in an object where you give it different stages. What we're going to do is say stage 0. So we get every possible thing from this PostCSS preset env to work, and that way we can use things like nesting and a bunch of other stuff. So if I come down this way, just real quick to let you know, this is what we're using here. We can use tomorrow's CSS today, and if I come over here, it'll walk you through how to do all this, show you how you can actually nest things using modern CSS. You can use other things like these color functions, and we're not going to do a ton of that, but you can see how now it gives us access to a bunch more, and I wrote the CSS in this project to require this. Now, one of the cool things that comes with PostCSS preset env is you get access to auto prefixer, which will automatically add things like WebKit prefixes to things. And in order for that to work properly, the best thing to do is to come into your package.json and add one more thing. And that would be something called a browser's list. We're just going to pass this the defaults, and that way it will use the defaults. Make sure you add a comma here so it'll keep working. And now, if we did everything correctly, it should be able to come over here and say npm run dev. It should get that dev server back up and running, but it's not. So let's see what's going on. Aha, I'm glad I did that. So what I need to do is just move this over here, I think. There we go. All right, that should work. Let me restart the server. And now I should be able to come over here and you see that this is all working as expected. All right, well, I hope you feel confident about how to write CSS when it comes to Astro. You can write it in the component. That's typically my default when it comes to individual components, is keep the styling directly with the component. You can also import things like I showed you with that imported global style sheet. Those imports will automatically be globally used throughout the site. In other words, they're not scoped to the component, and I went ahead and imported it into the main layout just to underscore that. And then finally, we set everything up with PostCSS, and that way we get all the modern features of CSS, while we can just write it however we want, and it will basically backfill to older browsers and make sure everything works. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about Astro components, including the footer, the nav bar, and a button component. I'll see you there.